Hey everyone. So apparently there are some talks going on today between the Iranians and the Americans through the Qataris as a mediator in Doha. There was some disagreement about whether the talks were actually happening. Trump announced that there's going to be talks, and then the Iranians said, "No, we're not having negotiations." We're going to get into all that and what that actually means. But to get us started on the current situation, let's watch a clip from General Jack Keane. He says some very insightful things in this clip. I'm going to stop it a couple times and make some comments, but let's start with that. It'll set us up for the rest of the conversation. Here we go. General Jack Keane.
All right, let's bring in retired General Jack Keane. He's a Fox News senior strategic analyst, and it's great to have you here. Just want to put this up there for people to see in case they missed it. This is yesterday from Iranian's president. Mutual understanding is a two-way street. If the American side adheres to the agreement, we will also fulfill our commitments. Our approach to unreasonable saber-rattling and baseless threats is to rely on rationality and human dignity in decision-making and to defend decisively and fearlessly when it comes time to act. They always add many more words than they need to, and basically what they're saying. How do you think things are going at the moment as these talks get back underway?
Well, you just put your finger on one of the problems we're facing. At the heart of this issue is we have people saying things that certainly seem reasonable and appealing to us, and then we have actions like we've just witnessed. June the 14th, we got a deal. And that deal had one principal agreement in it, most of it negotiations for 60 days for all the tough issues. But the one agreement was Straits of Hormuz will be opened by the Iranians. The United States will remove the naval blockade. We removed the blockade, and within days of the agreement, the Iranians begin to do what? Control the Straits of Hormuz, directing ships to go, when to depart, where to go, and how much insurance to pay. And those ships that did not abide by it, they fired on them. Mm-hmm. And that, the president wasn't about to take that, and we responded in kind as a result of it. So now we're going into another phase of negotiations. And listen, on June the 18th, 4 days after the agreement, the Supreme Leader says, number one, we will control the Straits of Hormuz. Number two, we want all sanctions removed. Number three, we want all of our frozen assets back. And number four, we want the United States military presence to depart the Middle East. Now, is he playing to his domestic audience, as people would suggest? Or does that defiance and arrogance sound similar to what we've been experiencing for 47 years?
Okay, this is a super important point, but let me first address the first thing that he said there, where he said that the agreement, the 14-point memorandum of understanding, the agreement was that we're going to lift the blockade and they're going to open the Straits of Hormuz. And then they started messing around in the Straits of Hormuz. And he then said that President Trump was having none of it. So he responded in kind. I disagree. I don't think that President Trump responded in kind, because the Iranians were supposed to open the Strait of Hormuz. They've been firing on vessels. Did a video about this yesterday. There's very little shipping going through because everyone sees what the situation is, and Iran is exerting its control over the Strait of Hormuz, not open freely. But the blockade isn't back. If responding to them hitting vessels in the Strait of Hormuz is not a reversal of the memorandum of understanding, put the blockade back on. Say, okay, the deal was you open the straits, and then we remove the blockade and start easing up on you in other ways. And then the straits aren't really opened. They're firing on vessels going through. The response should actually be to put the blockade on and say memorandum of understanding is null and void until you do your part. You see, the Iranians got away with it. They're now shipping their oil out. They're making a lot of money. We'll get into it in a little bit about how much money they're making, how much they've been shipping out. But they're shipping their oil out. They're selling their oil. They have cash flow now that they didn't have before. Do they have all of it? Do they have the unfrozen assets? No, not entirely. We'll get into that too in a bit. But they have cash flow, And the response is to bomb them in various ways. And we know that that's not their primary concern. They've been bombed a lot. They don't, I always say they don't care. It's not that they don't care. They don't want to be bombed, but that's not a deterrence for them. That's the point. That's not a deterrence for them to exert their control of the Strait of Hormuz. So that's one issue where I think that, General Keane just pushed back a little bit there. But the more important issue he raises is the question of, like, do you pay attention to what they say or to what they do or for what's for domestic consumption? And this brings me to another clip. I'm going to come back to General Keane in a second, but I just want to play this to you. It's going a little bit viral. This is Vice President J.D. Vance on the Michael Knowles show. And he's talking about negotiating with the Iranians. And he's talking about what happened yesterday or over the last couple of days, where President Trump said that there's going to be another round of negotiations in Doha, high-level negotiations. And then the Iranians said, no, we're not negotiating with the Americans. And they kind of denied that they were negotiating. And we'll see what that denial means very soon. But listen to what J.D. Vance said about it.
I'm not saying they're going to, I can't predict, of course, the future. But so one, there are talks. There were scheduled talks, really technical talks building on the negotiation that we've already had. Those are definitely happening tomorrow. One of the things I find just fascinating and frustrating about the Iranians is they'll say, no, there aren't peace talks ongoing, but there are technical talks between the United States and Iran about the peace deals. It's like, okay, so it's a Persian negotiating tactic and a Persian rhetorical device that I don't understand, but that is the way that the Iranians have done this.
Okay. It's a Persian negotiating tactic. It's a Persian, device. And the Americans have also said things in recent days like, it doesn't matter what they say. We know what they agreed to. And what General Keane is pointing out here is like, okay, when you look at what they're saying to us and what they're saying in the negotiating rooms and what they're saying in public, there's this tendency to say, oh, what they agreed to with us is the real thing. And what they're saying in public, what they're saying to their own people, we don't have to pay so much attention to that. And he's saying, what General Keane is raising here is, why is that necessarily the case? What's more consistent with their past behavior? That's his point here. Let me just go back a little bit and play that last little bit of what he said again.
Days after the agreement, the Supreme Leader says, number one, we will control the Straits of Hormuz. Number two, we want all sanctions removed. Number three, we want all of our frozen assets back. And number four, we want the United States military presence to depart the Middle East. Now, is he playing to his domestic audience, as people would suggest? Or does that defiance and arrogance sound similar to what we've been experiencing for 47 years? So
in other words, we look at it and say, oh, it's just bluster. He's just doing that for domestic consumption. And Keane, what General Keane is saying is like, no, that's actually who they are. That's actually their position. And the conciliatory talk in the negotiating room and putting their name on a piece of paper and saying that they're negotiating, that's the phony stuff. That's what they're doing to string along the Americans. But they have every intention of controlling the Strait of Hormuz completely.
Suggestion is we've got to roll up our sleeves and make sure who we're dealing to. The people are talking nice to us, and they've given us an expectation that this is all going to work out. And at the same time, we have hardliners and true policymakers taking a completely different approach. I think
that is so critical, right? They're telling us what we want to hear. They're stringing us along. And again, for some reason, in the mind of the American negotiators, what is said in the negotiating room is the real thing and is to be taken more seriously. And they kind of wave away the things they say publicly. That's something, I think General Keane's hit on something here.
It's less about the domestic audience, as some would suggest, and it's more about who they really are.
Yeah.
Bingo. Bingo.
Lauren Simonetti from Fox Business tracks the Strait every day. She says he had about 40 pass through yesterday, of which at least 10 took the Omani routes, which would be considered the international route, that lower route, not the Iranian desired route through the islands that go along its shore there. But Iran's spokesperson for the foreign ministry said about an hour ago that Tehran is determined to maintain its right over the management of the Strait of Hormuz. What does that mean to you when you're trying to mince words for what's considered a domestic audience or an international audience?
Well, isn't that in defiance of the MOU and the agreement we just struck, for sure?
Okay, here I have to push back on General Keane. He's saying that the Iranians saying that they will control the Strait of Hormuz is in defiance of the 14-point memorandum of understanding. Let's go take a look at it. I don't believe it is. I think that is the way a lot of people want to think about it. But take a look. It's all about point 5 in the memorandum. Let's read it together. Upon the signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days. Only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. Does that sound like they are agreeing not to have any management of the Strait of Hormuz, that they're ceding their rights as they see it to manage the Strait of Hormuz? All it says is that they will make arrangements using their best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels for 60 days. The traffic of commercial vessels will immediately start, and considering the need for removing tactical and military obstacles and demining by the Islamic Republic of Iran will be instated within 30 days. The Islamic Republic of Iran will conduct dialogue with the Sultanate of Oman to define the future administration of maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz. Sounds actually like they do have rights of management of the Strait. So this has been sold to us as the Straits of Hormuz are going to be totally open, free navigation, but that's not the way the MOU is written. And Trump talks about it that way also. I don't know if this is sloppy work by the American negotiators who wrote this. I don't know. But what General Keane just said there, that the Iranians saying that they retain the right to manage the Strait of Hormuz runs counter to the memorandum. I don't see that here. Sorry. Maybe someone disagrees. You could put a comment in the comments of this video if you disagree with my read on it. Let's keep going. He has a little bit more to say here.
Listen, the Straits of Hormuz is a seminal objective that Iran has achieved, the control over it. I think it's up there with nuclear weapons. And I say that because it gives them deterrence. The reality is they have geopolitical influence as a result of it in the region. We can shut it down anytime we have a problem with you, anytime we have a problem with the United States. That's leverage. That gives them dominance and over escalation. And that is an achievement that they have. I think at some point we're likely, given what you just heard and what their actions speak, we will find ourselves at some point having to take control of it ourselves and open it up. But
huge point he just made here. Huge point. He says it's as important to them as nuclear weapons. You see, the way that memorandum of understanding was written, as I just pointed out to you, it does not say that it's international waters and they have no right to control it and that freedom of navigation is international law. It doesn't say any of that. It actually, in the wording, kind of concedes the point that they are in control. They'll make accommodations for the freedom of commercial vessels, and then they'll have conversation for 60 days. They won't charge, and they'll have conversations with the Omanis. And what he's pointing out here is that this is their leverage. They know that this is the leverage that they have, and that's why they are not going to give it up. They're not going to give it up. Yes, they're supposed to make arrangements for vessels to go through, but look what they did. They get the relief. They're allowed to sell their oil. I know that there's negotiations over the assets, but it seems that the Qataris have already started freeing up some of their assets. We're not sure exactly what that looks like, but nevertheless, even without the frozen assets, they have cash flow. They're selling their oil, and that hasn't been rolled back even with their violations of the Straits of Hormuz.
We're down this path. We're certainly going to give this an opportunity to see if it works out. but we have to maintain a healthy dose of skepticism here.
So somebody who has a little bit of skepticism is Adam Smith. He's a congressman from Washington.
Okay, and then they play a clip of a congressman who doesn't believe the Iranians. It's fine. Okay, that's the clip from General Keane. And, here we see it in Iranian state media from yesterday. Iran says no U.S. talks planned. European officials not invited to funeral of late leader. And this is Esmail Baghai, the Iranian foreign ministry spokesman, says that there was no plans to negotiate. He says the deployment of an Iranian expert delegation to Qatar, headed by Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs, Kazem Gharibabadi, who also serves as Iran's chief negotiator, was aimed at following up on the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding. You notice that J.D. Vance called it technical talks. And if you search the headlines today, the Americans love saying this, that these are technical talks. They're technical talks. And what does that sound like to you? Technical talk sounds like, well, they're moving forward with the next stage of the MOU. They're going to talk about the uranium. They're going to talk about enrichment. They're going to talk about technical matters. Well, it turns out that the technical talks are not about the nuclear or anything like of the sort. They're actually about freeing up Iranian assets. We'll see that soon. Baghai said that since the memorandum was signed on June 18th, Iran has used every opportunity to ensure the implementation of its provisions, including the first clause. That's the one about Lebanon. He said that Iran was also following up on provisions related to ending the naval blockade and facilitating access to Iran's unfrozen and previously restricted assets. He said these issues required continuous follow-up and that the meeting in Doha would be held with the Qatari side for that purpose. See what's going on here? The purpose of the talks from their perspective, and the Americans haven't denied this. The Americans haven't said what the technical talks are about. And it's funny, in all the interviews are never saying, when you say technical talks, what do you mean? What will be the subjects? Because I think the Americans are trying to present these talks. They're trying to sell it that there's progress being made on moving forward into the next phase of this, as though the initial agreement, the initial implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding is already going well. The Americans keep talking about how there's progress and there's good signs. All this is about, from the Iranians' perspective, is getting their money. Because that's irreversible. Once they get the money, they got the money. Like they're selling oil now. Once they're selling oil, that's cash. They have breathing room now. They have oxygen. And yet, they're still restricting passage in the Strait of Hormuz. They can't give up the control, but they know how to play it. They're allowing ships through, but they're occasionally hitting one. The numbers they're allowing through are restricted. What they say, 40-some ships. Before the war, it was like 130 ships a day. They're messing around in the Strait of Hormuz and not giving up on that leverage, but they also know that Trump doesn't want to say the Memorandum of Understanding is over, the ceasefire is over, we're back to kinetic. They have him over, well, they perceive it as they have Trump stuck because they know that he doesn't want to go back to kinetic activity beyond bombing here and there. They don't care about that. Bomb us every now and then. That's your retaliation, and you can show that you're not tolerating what we're doing in the Straits of Hormuz. But that doesn't, as long as they're getting the cash flow in, so fine, they get hit a few times by bombs, they're happy. That's what's going on here. And then it talks about the funeral for Khamenei. And then on Lebanon, Baghai said the first clause of the memorandum clearly required an immediate permanent end to the war on all fronts. Right, and he stresses the fact that they want Israel to pull out of Lebanon, and then asks whether any future negotiations, including nuclear talks, would depend on the formal announcement of a timetable for withdrawal of Israeli forces from southern Lebanon. He said the memorandum itself clearly addressed the issue. He said Clause 13 stipulated that negotiations on the final agreement could begin only after implementation of 5 specified provisions had commenced, particularly the first clause. In other words, they want their assets unfrozen. They want Israel withdrawn from Lebanon. Remember, I made a video yesterday about how the Iranians view these negotiations. They view them as a temporary way station to regroup and get ready for the next round of fighting. They view it as part of the war, and they have zero intention of ever getting to the next stage of it. I played a couple clips in that video yesterday. They don't care about all the stuff that comes later. They're never going to give in on the nuclear. They're never going to give in on anything else. The ballistic missiles and the proxies aren't even in there. They want to drag it on. We see this in another piece here, where with Ghalibaf. Here, take a look. Ghalibaf, no progress on remaining MOU clauses until initial 5 are finalized. This is from today. And in this piece, so he talks about Lebanon a bit and how that's the top priority. But look what he says down here. Negotiation is a method of struggle. Ghalibaf described negotiation as a method of struggle, stating that this approach perfectly aligns with the strategy of revolutionary rationality. From this perspective, he explained that negotiation does not mean compromise, but rather shifting the field of conflict from a costly arena to a sphere of tension management, diplomacy. The parliament speaker emphasized that the experience from previous Lebanese ceasefires shows that within a lexicon of the resistance, within the lexicon of the resistance, meaning within their lexicon, a ceasefire is not an absolute halt, but a managed situation. He characterized this as coercive diplomacy, meaning an agreement is signed not out of weakness, but to achieve strategic objectives under conditions where reaching a sustainable peace is impossible. He argued that this perspective does not contradict struggle, but complements it by preserving the lives of human assets for battle at a more critical time. Okay, that is the Muslim way. That is the concept of hudna, which is what you would call a ceasefire, but it's just a temporary cessation of hostilities so that you can get stronger to fight further down the road. Ghalibaf stated the implementation of the Memorandum of Understanding was contingent upon the end of the war and Iran and Lebanon lifting the blockade, reopening the strait, exporting oil, and releasing frozen assets. He explained that according to Clause 13 of the memorandum, following its signing, its initiation depended on the implementation of clauses 1, 4, 5, 10, and 11. Just to review, 1, 4, 5, 10, 11. 1 is Lebanon. 4 is the removal of the blockade. That happened. 5 is the opening up of the Straits of Hormuz by Iran. 10 and 11 is that there will be no more sanctions, and they'll unfreeze their assets. Okay. He specified that this commencement included ending the war in Iran and Lebanon, lifting the blockade, opening the straits, etc., releasing the funds. Okay. And we also pointed out, I got to find it in here, that they've already sold millions and millions of barrels of oil, and they're selling oil every day. Stating that the American naval blockade had completely ended, Ghalibaf said that when they finalized the negotiations, they stipulated that Clause 1 of the agreement that no war or operations should henceforth be initiated against Lebanon, that parties must refrain from threats or force against one another. And look at what he says. Ghalibaf stated that from the day they lifted the blockade until then, they had exported more, until this interview, they had exported more than 40 million barrels of oil. He noted that this occurred in less than 10 to 12 days, whereas for nearly 50 odd days prior, they had not been able to export a single barrel of oil because of the blockade. They're making money. Yes, they don't have the unfrozen assets. Let me state what I said earlier. MOU goes into effect. Straits are supposed to be opened. Blockade is supposed to be lifted. And then these other financial relief, lifting of the sanctions, unfreezing assets, right? And then there's the Lebanon thing. They have cash flow now. Yes, the assets are not yet unfrozen. There's rumors that some have, but if they want to unfreeze the assets, but they're already selling millions and millions, about tens of millions of barrels of oil. They're making money. So if the response then, when they mess around in the Straits of Hormuz, is just to bomb a little bit, that's not going to deter them. That is the situation here. Talks about how they're selling lots and lots of oil. And now he gets to talking about, Ghalibaf got to talking about the Strait of Hormuz. Look what he says here. Ghalibaf emphasized that regarding the collection of fees for services in the Strait of Hormuz, they had agreed to provide them free of charge for only 60 days. He explained that this decision was made due to the insistence of the other Gulf states. The parliament speaker continued that they were committed to restoring technical conditions in the Strait of Hormuz, such as safety measures and mines, to pre-war standards within 30 days, and would refrain from charging fees for up to 60 days. He recalled that in Clause 5 of the agreement, it was stated that the Islamic Republic of Iran would work with the Sultanate of Oman to determine the future management and maritime services in the Strait of Hormuz in accordance with international law and sovereign rights, meaning that sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz belongs to Iran and Oman. The parliament speaker emphasized that it was impossible under any circumstances for them to back down on this issue. Impossible under any circumstances for them to back down on this issue. Think of what Jack Keane just said. It's as important to them as nuclear weapons. This is their leverage. This is their power. If they give up on the Straits of Hormuz, they give up on any leverage they have. They are not going to give this up, asserting that these were Iran's territorial waters, which is not true according to international law. And then he says something more. Look at this. He says, here, he emphasized they would fight where necessary and pursue the memorandum through dialogue where possible. He underscored that just as Lebanon is their red line, their management and sovereignty over the Straits of Hormuz are absolute and definite, promising that they would establish security there in the best possible manner. Amazing. The parliament speaker recalled his belief that these 5 clauses were being executed, noting that he had stated at the very beginning of the war that the Strait of Hormuz was a divine gift granted to them, serving as their greatest instrument of power. Their greatest instrument of power. Okay, that's how he views it. So when J.D. Vance says that Iran's denial of Doha talks is a Persian negotiating tactic that he doesn't understand, this is a report on him saying that on the Michael Knowles show. In this particular article, it goes on, it's from a Turkish outlet. Look what it says here. In a separate interview with Fox News, Vance said Washington was focused on Iranian actions rather than words, arguing that meaningful progress in the negotiations required Tehran to offer real concessions. What concessions have they offered? He says here, we see some positive signs, obviously. What are the positive signs? Remember, the 5 items, there was America lifting the blockade, America lifting sanctions, America unfreezing assets. There was a cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, which is again the most curious clause in the whole thing because America doesn't have control over that, and Israel and Lebanon were not even in the room. And then there's the Iranians having to open the Strait of Hormuz. In other words, of the 5, the only one that the Iranians have to do is open the Strait of Hormuz, and they're playing games with it. What are the positive signs that J.D. Vance is talking about that he sees? The Americans always want to project that things are going well. They want to keep things calm, and they don't want to go back to kinetic action. And the Iranians know all this, so they're tightening the squeeze on the Americans. Iran rules out U.S. meeting Doha talks to focus on frozen assets. That's what they're saying over and over again, that the purpose of these talks is to talk about the frozen assets. Look, Iran will hold talks with mediator Qatar on Wednesday regarding its frozen assets. What is expected to take place in Doha will be discussions regarding the implementation of provisions of the Memorandum of Understanding, including the provision concerning the release of Iran's frozen assets. That's what it's about. It's about the frozen assets. It's about them getting money. Okay? Talks in Qatar after the U.S.-Iran deal, what we know. This is a story about today's meeting from French media. Okay? What's it about? Trump says it'll take place tomorrow. There was a dispute. Issues on the table. A key issue in the U.S.-Iran accord needs to be ironed out is Iran's chokehold on the Strait of Hormuz. Traffic in the Strait dropped over the weekend, of course, because a vessel was struck. A key issue for Iran is its frozen funds. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian said Monday that the necessary steps are underway to release them. Folks, there is not the progress that the Americans are claiming there is. It's not progress. They haven't implemented this memorandum. I'll tell you what's happened. The United States has lifted a blockade, allowing Iran to sell its oil. And the Iranians are playing games in the Strait of Hormuz, opening it up just enough so that they could say that it's open and that they keep stringing Trump along. They can't just say we're not implementing it at all. They're stringing him along, messing around, flexing their muscles, selling their oil, getting cash, trying to get more cash, trying to unfreeze their assets so they can get their hands on more money before this whole thing falls apart, because they don't even expect it to go further. They certainly don't want to deal with the real issues down the road of the nuclear and all that. None of that is even getting off the ground. They haven't even gotten out of the starting gate. The 5 provisions that were supposed to be implemented immediately, they're still fighting over them. And that's exactly how Iran wants it. What does Iran love? They love stringing things along. They love buying time. They love kicking the can down the road. And they know that the more things go on, the more chance they have to survive, the more they're replenishing their bank accounts or getting cash to do what they need to do. That's where we are right now, folks. Not a great situation. All right, keep watching. Thanks for watching today. I hope this was interesting. I hope it was helpful. But just we have to be realistic about where we are in this situation. God bless.